are too kind. So one of the things that companies struggle with is to find a common language, is to find words that resonate with everyone. And it doesn't matter what your definition or what words you use, as long as an organization you clearly define what that sounds like. And so, just the definition of culture, if I ask every one of you in the room what your definition of culture is, my guess is that y'all would have a different definition. So, for the purposes of today, the definition of culture is, refers to the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize the members of an organization and define its nature. And culture is rooted in the organization's goals, its strategies, its structure, its approaches to labor, customers, investors, and the greater community. And Michael's going to talk to us a little bit later about how we line all of those things together. But it really boils down to, who are you? What's really important to you? From the CEO, that needs to start with him or her. What do they value? Do they value teamwork? Do they value innovation? Do they value initiative? What are the things that they really, really value? And when you determine what those things are that you value, then you can more clearly put together what is your vision. Vision is where the organization wants to go together. The mission is what they do together, and then the values are those guiding behavioral principles. What's one thing that you hear companies say that is one of their corporate values? What's one that's fairly?
Integrity.
Oh, I hate it.
Is it like fingernails over the blackboard, ladies and gentlemen?
Just do it. Don't say you have to do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna use one of Michael's stories, but he worked with a client, and she said that her values were integrity, and so they were coming to put together some kind of contract, and the first thing she wanted to do was several different felonies all wrapped up into one. And so he ended up having to call her on and go, I don't think so. And what was her reaction, Michael, when you?
When I talked with them about their values, and then I challenged them on their values when we began to talk about what they wanted to do, what they said was, well, our values are personal, this is business. So there was a lack of congruence there. And I get that answer a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know that there really should be a whole lot of difference between between the two. But the where are you also goes to your stakeholders. It also goes to your vendors, the folks that you do business with, as well as the community. If you're in a fairly small community, and there's kind of a group of people. I know even in my neighborhood, how you got that. Number one, it's a pretty diverse neighborhood, but we all kind of share the same values. And I'm like, how did we all end up in 4 or 5 blocks? But you'll find that in communities as well, where people value the same things. And so plopping your business down in the middle of a community that's has very different values, may or may not make you successful, particularly if you're a small retailer, if you're a service industry, that sort of thing. Can you really separate the employee and customer thing? Do they go together?
Yes.
How so?
Happy people, happy profits, happy customers.
Yeah. Cindy.
And you pose a very interesting question, because the way I interpret it was, who are your values aimed at, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, you're not aiming your values at anyone, it's everyone, because it's who you are as a company, right? So to say we're customer oriented, well, that doesn't really serve your company. You should be people oriented, because by just taking care of your customers, you might be like Amazon, treating your employees like garbage, and ultimately they're not going to be able to serve your customers effectively. So shouldn't your values be who you are as people to all your stakeholders?
Well, your employees have to be happy first, or your customers aren't. It's bottom line. So anytime a company says our clients are first, I'm always a little skeptical of that, because really the employees need to be first. Because if the employees are first, the customers follow. As a consultant, I see some great cultures, and I see some really broken and dysfunctional ones, and just like you see. And a lot of it has to do with the fact they're focused on the wrong thing.
Exactly, from the top up. And it could be that what they value and their actions don't match. It could be that they don't value employees. I mean, there can be lots of different things. Mr. Michael, you had a comment?
No, I was just saying that some companies come forth with the concept that they have internal customers being employees. So when you talk about developing a focus on the customer, their mantra, and I don't see it that often, but their mantra is that when we say customer, we mean internal and external, and we act accordingly. But again, very, very rare. And even those who pay lip service to it don't do it very well in some cases.
Why are so many companies missing the mark? Is it just a lack of education? Or is it leadership, old brain versus new brain? What do you attribute it to?
C, all of the above. When we first started putting this together, I went and I started looking at, what was out there online, that, articles and SlideShare and all those kinds of things that, people are publishing about culture. And number one, nobody really clearly defines it. It's this, it's this nebulous thing out in space that no one can really define. And so I think in some cases, because they've not really started at the core, which is, what do you value? What's important to you? There's a woman in New Mexico. She worked for JetBlue, and her name is Ann Rhodes. And Ann said, you start with the company values, and they built JetBlue on that values, and she still does a lot of work around it. But if you think about it, if I value integrity and I do things that absolutely go, and I have behaviors that are contrary to that, number one, employees see that. They're not stupid. They know that you're saying one thing and doing another here. And so it's where do I start? And if I want to create a culture, how do I do it? And, as we started digging through it, there is, because we are the people, profit, and process guys, there is a process.
We forget that we're all human, and as human beings, we tend to be dysfunctional almost by definition. There was a book out several years ago called Why Smart People Do Stupid Things. And so I think oftentimes, despite the level of education and experience that you may have, your natural dysfunctions oftentimes come out. And even though you may know that on paper this is the right thing to do, your ego holds sway. And I'm sure we've all seen it, we've experienced it. And oftentimes, it's just like saying you do something wrong, and then after you get caught, you say, I'm sorry. Well, what does that do when you knew it was wrong in the first place? So we're fundamentally dysfunctional. And I think that's why so often these things don't hold sway in an organization.
That, and like I said, to be able to clearly define, what it is and to get to it is difficult as well.
I just had another comment or observation that with working with a lot more clients, a lot more companies are owned by private equity firms.
Sure.
You go public, you have outside stakeholders who then oftentimes impact, they have one
Sure,
set of
definitely.
values or impact or expectations that most often, more than not, misalign with the original reason they invested or bought in that company, and they constrain the leaders from operating in the way, the culture that they probably built that made it so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's much more of a trend that I see that's negatively impacting culture. They know what to do, but, so sorry, it was just an observation.
No,
It's
a very
unique.
very
It's
astute
amazing.
observation.
And if I can just add on that also, 'cause it sounds like there's that profit oriented.
Yeah, profit oriented.
And profit focus. And even though your statistics and your numbers are very valid and very true, I see that in a lot of small businesses. They're making decisions based on the profit, not realizing that the culture and the strategies that drive the culture will
And drive profit.
profits.
Yeah.
That's true, and especially in small businesses. Let's do this. We know a big box retailer who says we have 3 focuses in life. Number one is customer service. Number 2 is in-stock merchandise, and number 3 is store cleanliness. And they've got a pyramid that shows the CEO at the bottom of the chain, who's supposed to be supporting all the people, and all the associates are up at the top, and you guys are the ones that are valuable. And they try to live those values every day. The problem is dealing with people is hard. So you have a store manager who embraces all these values, and he said, I'm going to treat my people well. Every morning he's saying hi to people, shaking hands. But then he goes back in his office and he's got all these metrics that corporate says he has to meet. So he starts thinking, if I treat my employees well and I'm not chit-chatting, I'm not getting this stuff done. Which is easier for me, to work on the metrics? And then to Michael's point, his selfish ambition kicks in and he says, if I meet these metrics, I get a bigger bonus. So he's not saying screw the employees, but that's human nature. I'm going to work on what's easiest, and working with people, inspiring them, encouraging them, building them up. That's hard work, and that's why stuff doesn't work in corporations, assuming that
Quick wrap or longer wrap. Right.
Yep.
To that success, right?
Exactly, exactly. And, again, if you go back to, using the values as your lens, which is a wonderful segue into, so if you want to establish a culture or you want to shift the one that you currently have, or you really want to just reinforce what it is that you have, you really have to hire to those values. And I was telling someone earlier, you can teach people to do just about anything, but you can't necessarily change, the things that they value. And, I worked in a group where, what they valued and what I valued were really different. And it's an uncomfortable place to work. And it becomes that incubator of, of discontent. So, once you've clearly defined those values, then you can hire to them. And I have an exercise, and we'll just do it as a group because it's probably easier. But, what are some of the questions, if you could do that for me, I'd be grateful. What are some of the questions that you, that you can ask as you're hiring folks that, go to those values? And so if you were looking to hire someone that you wanted to be incredibly accountable for their own actions and behaviors, what kinds of questions would you ask that person? What would be a behavioral type of question you could ask to get to accountability? How do you hold yourself accountable?
How do you hold yourself accountable?
That's one way. Any other ideas on questions you might ask around the accountability piece?
How do you know you're successful every day?
That's a good one as well. One of the things that I ask is, tell me about a time when you had a deadline and that you missed it, and tell me why, and tell me, what happened, and tell me what you're going to do differently as a result of it. And boy, talk about people not wanting to answer that question. Tell me about a time that you weren't able to. So if you, if the CEO and the management team and have established that accountability is going to be one of the values, one of the things that we hire to, it also needs to be one of those things that you fire to. And if you're going to fire somebody to, as a cultural fit, you better well be pretty clear about what those cultural values are. If not, then you end up just doing things willy-nilly, and that probably will get you into some legal troubles. Behavioral questions, but two things. People who have been incredibly successful tend to continue to be successful. But also, did they do any self-reflecting? Are they folks who are continuous learners? Are they folks who learn from their mistakes? Do you think engagement is a result of accountability? Because one of the other things that organizations are working on is engagement. Is accountability a piece of the engagement piece? Are they intertwined, interrelated?
What you're doing, but you're not necessarily engaged in what you're doing. There's a big difference.
Can you be engaged without accountability?
So can you be engaged without accountability? No. But you can be accountable and not engaged because you're doing the everyday process, but you're not really engaged in what you're doing, and that's a huge buzzword for me. Is that they're just doing they're accountable for what they're doing. They're getting it done. They're doing the matrix. They're crossing it off. But are they really engaged in what they're doing? No.
I would just say it depends on what their job is.
Yeah, it
If they have
does.
a transactional job,
I
that
see a
could be
lot
the
of
case
that.
versus
Engaged
social
means
job.
that you're not just doing it, but you're engaged in looking at the big picture. So.
Yeah, and the engagement and the accountability and the values. I did some work. We piloted the employee engagement, and so we measured everything. Do you have a best friend at work? that question was kind of bizarre until I really understood what it meant. And we looked at all of these different behaviors. And, after a couple of years, we would look at engagement scores. And we were able to connect them to profitability. We were able to connect them to customer service scores. And those stores, those pharmacies where the employees were highly engaged, the upside potential for profit, for customer satisfaction was huge. The stores where they were actively disengaged, the stores were losing money. And the customer service scores were in the tank. So there is a direct correlation between that. But, one of the things and it was Gallup's, and I think they've, revised it, is there's, a million different questions on there. And so then you roll it out to the team and say, all right, what are you going to work on from an engagement standpoint based on these 31 questions? And people get lost in that as well. You need to focus on one thing and do that really well instead of trying to fix every engagement problem that, that you have coming and going down the pike. And so, all of these things tie back to the, to the values, to the culture, and how people go from there. And then teamwork, what are the behaviors of teamwork? And I was telling Dan, I'm going to steal a story from a woman we saw recently at the AZ SHRM Council. She was talking about employees who didn't hold themselves accountable and are always finding someone else to blame things on. And she said, people would come in her office and say, you're not going to believe what happened. Susie over in IT, that program just failed miserably. I don't know what we're going to do. You need to go talk to her. So she said she grabbed her by the arm and took her down the hall and said, hey, Sally, this person wants to talk to you about your IT initiative. And it was a little bit different conversation after the employee who was ratting out the IT person was confronted with that person. And so she called it, worry about yourself Wednesday. That is not a behavior of teamwork. Is going and ratting out your fellow employees. And so when you clearly define what those behaviors are that go to those values, whether it's teamwork, whether it's accountability. I think the other example that I used in most of the companies that I work with struggle with is finding folks who will take the initiative to do things on their own without being poked. And so, what are the behaviors of those folks who, take initiative and then, develop behavioral questions, based on that. So I'm going to do my 5-minute Dennis Miller rant, and you guys are going to have to get the hook to get me off of here. So, values and culture really boils down to who are you and what do you stand for? And if you use it as a filter and you use it as a lens, as you put together your mission, your vision, and your values, and we talked a little bit about, mission, vision, and what those mean, it also helps you define your target audience or your target customer. If I'm all about integrity and I'm going out and looking for customers who might not be, or I'm all about innovation and and I'm not targeting customers who are they really going to be able to connect with me? So I think it really, absolutely helps you, determine who your customer is. Incorporate the message into marketing, advertising, PR, and sales. When you know who you are and you know what your story is, it's real easy to tell customers that. And it's real easy for them to identify with you and say, you know what, I want to do business with those folks. Or I don't want to do business with those folks. Your IT strategy, if in your mission, vision, and values, and you sincerely think that, that innovation is one of your values and your systems are old and clunky, not only internally and externally, then you've sent a very different message about whether you're really engaged in innovation. Employee branding. And we did some work for another group, and we put together a series of workshops on talent acquisition and management, because nobody's having a problem finding great employees right now, are they? But if you really identify what you value, what those behaviors are, and you interview to those, then it'll be really easy to find those great folks who are going to fit in. Performance management. How do you hold people accountable for their behaviors if you haven't defined the behaviors that you want to see? And so, to the woman who ran in and was, ratting out the IT folks, I would ding her. I don't care what she accomplished in a year's time. But I certainly would have that tough conversation with her around teamwork. And if you have a problem, you need to address it first. As organizations move through the stages of their cycle of, growth, what's your leadership style? What leadership style are you looking for? So you really need to identify what those values are for that. And then social responsibility. So you're assessing your current culture, the folks that, are already working for you. How do you have that elephant in the conference room conversation around what would your employees and your customers say about your company values today? And you really have to be clear on what they say now to be able to change what you want it to be in the future. Do employees and customers trust and respect that their leaders' actions are authentic? I actually belong to that LinkedIn group on authentic leadership, which is, again, about are you who you say you are, and have you clearly identified your values? Is the employee performance consistent with company values and goals? Is a company growing and profitable, or sales, fluctuate, squeezing profits and cash flow? Determining the desired culture. What's the business reason for changing it? And that will really help as you put together your values and put together your plan, is what is the business reason for changing it? Are you looking for a different type of customer? Are you looking for, or do you have a public relations problem at the moment? And looking at, what's the business reasons for your, to change the culture for your employees, the business reasons for changing for your customers. And then, what should it be and why? And then how do you change the culture? Assessing the values. It goes back to what's important to you. Who are you? What does that look like today? And then develop the management's leadership capabilities, as well as that next line of management folks, developing those capabilities and behaviors around what it is that you value, and hiring to it, and not being afraid in some cases to exit someone from your organization for it. And then, the highly effective work teams are the ones who communicate freely and openly.